Did I ever tell you about the home invasion robbers that I had in my old
No.
house?
Oh my
Okay.
good. I would say go back to talk about the Egg McMuffin lady, but no, let's hear about
Right.
this before we go back to her.
So here's a story for you guys at home. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I used to live in the San Fernando Valley when I was a kid, right? And just to kind of show you guys that, it really has, although race is a big factor in the way the police, how the police treat you, sometimes you know, sometimes it's just straight up incompetence. Okay. Now remember, my
Yeah.
father is a cop, all right? So that factors into this. So one time when I think I was in 11th grade, right? So this is like the early 90s. I come home one time and I find my family out. I was coming home from my friend's house. It was like 1 in the morning, right?
Hmm.
And my friend's dad is dropping me off, and I find my family outside, and I'm like, oh, what's going on, right? And I pull up, and apparently what happened is that a couple of guys came with the intention of stealing my father's car, right?
Hmm.
And basically walk up, a couple of like gang members, right?
Right.
And this is so back in the early 90s is when the gang activity was at a height in Los Angeles for all you people at home. That's when it was really bad in LA. That's when we had drive-by shootings and
Mm-hmm.
all of that shit, right? Um, but I think this was actually before the riots, I think. But anyway, so and I find out what happened is that these two oh shit, wrong layer there. Let me undo that. These two guys come up and basically busted down my front door. So my mom, you know, saw them on the porch, and we had one of those little chain locks on the door. And so she opens the door with the chain lock, and they just pushed it right open because those things don't work, right?
Yeah.
And they had a rifle, and they wanted to steal my dad's. And my dad had like an IROC Z28 or some shit like that. I think that's
Hmm.
what it was, an IROC Z28. They wanted to steal his car, so so she screams, right? And my dad was at home, and he was just finished cleaning his gun, and he comes out and he left it on the table, you
Hmm.
know. So he's like, so it's like, when this happened, it was like 11:30 at night, right? And
Hmm.
so he's basically like in his underwear, ready to go to sleep and shit. And there's two guys, and one of the guys had a 22 rifle, right? So he
Hmm.
starts fighting him, and my brother, and my mom run outside. My brother was like, I think I was like 17 and he was like 20. And so
Right.
he runs outside to go call the police, right? Because, this is before cell phones. So he jumped the fence and went into our neighbor's house and called the cops. And
Right.
my mother tried to jump the fence too, but she's like, big, and she
Mm.
broke her foot, you know, trying to jump this
Poor
fence,
thing.
right? Which she shouldn't have tried to do that. She should have just ran out the front, but you panic, right? So, you can't. Right. So she tries to jump over this like wall. It wasn't really a fence, it was a wall. She breaks her foot. Right. And then basically, so that leaves my dad fighting these two guys, I think there were two black guys, right? And one of them had a rifle, and the rifle had the safety on. So the guy's trying to shoot the rifle, and what's happening is that bullets are falling out, and he's like, cocking it or whatever. I'm not really sure how these things work, but anyway, so there's bullets falling out of the thing. He's not firing it, and the other dude is like grabbing my dad from behind. And so my dad is, a police officer, and he was also in the Air Force Reserves,
Mm.
right? And he was also in the, National Guard. So yeah, he basically beats the shit out of these two guys, right,
Right.
in his underwear. But he got messed up, and when I came home, because I come home 2 hours after this, right, he had this big ass cut on his head,
Oh.
so he didn't get away unscathed. But he fights these two guys off, and they run away. And apparently, up near my old house was in the valley. There's basically a wooded area behind it. They ran off into there, and a park ranger caught them. Right.
Hmm.
So one guy gets caught by the park ranger, which is funny because park rangers are not armed. Like basically, the dude thought he was a cop. He's from the city. He's never seen a park ranger before, right?
Right.
Park rangers, you can just run away from them. Right? I got stories about that too. But anyway, and then his other friend just gets away, and eventually the dude that got caught ratted his friend out. So they both went to prison, right? So anyway, I get home at 1 in the morning. So that's like, an hour and a half after this shit happened, right? There's no police there.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're basically waiting for him to show up, right? And, my mother's foot is fucked up, and we're like, we don't know if it's broken or sprained or whatever. We're wrapping it, she's crying. And my
Mm-hmm.
friend's dad that dropped me off drove out looking for these guys, didn't find them. Right, because
Mm-hmm.
he was crazy. That's a whole nother story. My friend's dad was a complete fucking nut. But anyway,
Right.
story for another time. And then at 3 in the morning, the cops show up. Two uniformed cops, right? And the thing is that my father outranked them, right? So they come up, he shows his ID to these two cops
Mm-hmm.
that came, right? And for like 40 minutes, just bitches these two guys out. Like, where the fuck were you? Like, seriously, just screaming at the top of his lungs, where the hell were you? I had to fight these guys by myself and called you fucking 3 hours ago. Like, going up. People were coming out of their houses at 3 in the morning watching this epic fucking ass chewing by like my father chewing these two cops out, just scream, and he's bleeding and shit. He like went in and put on a pair of pants, but he's still like got no shoes on.
Mm-hmm.
Just like yelling. He's like, I'm fighting these two guys. I gotta kill this. I gotta kill my family. We called you. Where the fuck were you? Like screaming, and they're just like, calm down, sir. Trying to pull that calm down, sir shit. But it's like
Yeah.
he's a cop. So what are they gonna do? They can't. What are they gonna
And one
tase
that
him and shit?
outranks them too.
Yeah,
So
he was like their
were they sweating
superior.
bullets?
So that was like, holy fucking shit. I was
Oh.
blown away by that shit because I was like 17 and had a few run-ins with the police myself. Luckily, I always managed to get away. But so I never actually got arrested for anything, thank God.
Right.
But
Are you sure your dad doesn't listen to your podcasts anymore?
he probably does. But
Okay.
anyway, but this shit was crazy. And so what ended up, so anyway, they eventually got a statement, and my mom went to the hospital, and all of that, got a cast on her foot, blah blah blah, right?
Mm-hmm.
And for like 2 weeks after that, detectives would come to the house and ask us questions, and we'd find bullets on the ground, because when these dudes were trying to shoot this gun, there were bullets that just fell out of the gun, because it was on, the safety was on, so they didn't know what they were doing. And so whenever we'd find one, we'd have to call them, and then they'd come, and then a guy would come and draw a little circle around it, and all of this shit, right?
Right. And they
Hey, we got
only
a
did
viewer
this
here,
because of
man.
who your father was, right?
Huh? What
They
was
only
that?
did this. They only did this because of who your father was, right? To
Um,
save ass. I mean,
I
to
think
save
so,
face,
but
so to speak.
wait, we got a viewer here, 1911. He's chambering around manually, and the bolt is cycling the gun. When they manually cycle the bolt, rounds are ejected this way. Yeah, that's what was happening. Okay, so our
Okay.
viewer here in 1911 actually works in a gun store, so he knows how this stuff works.
Okay.
Um, but yeah, that's exactly what was happening. Yeah, so we'd call them, and then they'd come and they'd circle it, you know, and all of this shit, right? And they actually changed our names when they put it in the newspaper, because that's how long ago this was. There was a little mention in the newspaper. They didn't, because they didn't want us to have any like retribution, because these guys were like in a gang, right?
Right.
Um, so then time passes and shit, and a few years later, I see this photo in my dad's room of him hanging out with the chief of police, like like playing golf with the chief of police, right?
Hmm.
And I'm like, oh, what? And apparently, what happened is that in order to keep us from suing the city, they promoted him. Like that was basically like he basically kind of just so that we wouldn't like get a lawsuit and like fucking drag them through the courts and the public opinion and all that shit. They just basically like promoted him, which I don't know if that was the reason why they promoted him, but I'm pretty sure it had something to do with it. You know what I mean?
Right.
So,
Right.
I don't know. I've never actually asked him about that, but I suspected that's what happened.
That
So,
sounds about
but
right.
that
So
kind
more.
of just, the point of that story is that, although this does happen disproportionately to black people and people of color, it's not always because of them. I mean, even one of their own in a pretty nice neighborhood. I used to live in it, it wasn't a shitty neighborhood, you
Mm-hmm.
know. It was, I mean, this was the 90s, but it was actually very, very decent, like I mean, this, it happens to everybody, and that's what people are pissed off about. You know what I mean? They're pissed off because, like you said, dude, it's been building for
Yeah.
like a real long time. You know what I mean? Like,
Mm-hmm.
so. Anyway, that's my home invasion story. That was not a nice night. It was very frightening and
Oh,
scary as
dude.
fuck.